Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. It's time we head back into the land of dreams one last time. But don't worry about the end. Endings are simply beginnings under a mask. So settle in by your monitor screens and pull out the most dangerous book on your shelf. It's time for Dreamscape Ouroboros, Part 3, The Beginning of the End.
Murky depths of unfathomable comprehension enveloped me, was part of me, wrapping me in a smothering blanket of dread and awe. But as I stared out into the void of pitch and nothingness, vibrant colors and amorphous shapes began to emerge from within the darkness, refining their details until a wondrous and impossible display of the fantastic revealed itself to my eyes. I'd never seen anything like it, nor has any other human eye in recorded history, but I will do my very best to describe what is otherwise indescribable. The void of dark emptiness progressively seemed to blink into life with the appearance of hundreds, if not millions, of bubble-like spheres that emanated bright colors, ranging from every hue of the known color spectrum, and some that were outside of it, or at least never seen by myself before, but simply the presentation of these never-before-witnessed hues sent my thoughts grasping for equilibrium, but combined together with all other lights in the void, wove for me a tapestry of color and a variety of shapes, both equally marvelous and horrifying. Their amorphous nature mirrored 1,000 Christmas twinkle lights within a winter night so dark that only these illuminations appeared within, floating in a cosmic void of colors and shifting forms that I finally understood as those bubble-like masses, drifting disembodied in the black, not unlike myself. Within them, I saw scenes playing out as a kind of silent moving picture. Children playing with parents, holding hands and growing old. Even myself as I ascended the basement steps of that old, decrepit mansion. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of these floating amorphous spheres, and although I desperately wanted to investigate the globe that was playing out my own life events, I was somehow being pulled by some unseen force into some unknown direction instead. Although whatever was tugging at my being was still hidden from my perception, the intended destination of my disembodied consciousness became readily apparent as a sphere of the blackest night approached me in the void, growing larger as I gained proximity to it, darker than that of the empty of which surrounded me. As the borders of this bubble surpassed my peripheral vision, rigid shapes within the darkness began to take form. It looked as though some obsidian city resided, isolated upon a black surface within a pitch-dark void of space. Due to the monochromacity of everything to behold, details were elusive and difficult to attain, and the best my mental functions would allow me was a vague description at best. Large, colossal structures jutting higher than any human-made high-rise, extending forth from a surface of a black planet much smaller than Earth, hanging isolated, lingering at the edge of some solar system, one that I presume to be our own. Descending closer and closer to its obsidian surface, the grand scale of every structure became horrifyingly apparent. Building-like structures that would tower over anything constructed on Earth, steps leading to gigantic architectures that rose over 15 feet in height, each step nearly twice the height of myself. Whatever beasts that I was dreaming up in this nightmare-scape, on the verge of mental birth, far too detached from reality to be real, must certainly be of considerable size, more than 4 times the size of a human being. Real or not, dream or reality, I didn't care. The trepidation instilled in my mind was real enough either way. Images and events thereafter came in flashes and excerpts, flat, rigid, horizontal surfaces, flashing electronic lights, colors outside any spectrum ever conceived, and behind it all, a mass blacker than any night, eclipsing the size of any known galaxy or celestial object, comprised of mouths and eyes and tentacles, clearly alive, amorphous and shifting, but somehow imprisoned by eternal slumber. How I know these things, I still cannot say for sure. There was blackness, then dreams, and finally, something else entirely. Limbs that stretched forward before me like arms, moving as I intended my arms to move, but these bore no semblance to that of human anatomy. The skin seemed more black than black, leathery and spongy, bending and flexing like a stick of darkened string cheese, yet rigid and solid, something that truly defied accurate definition, as I've so described here. Legs beneath me similar to those arm-like appendages, yet they were considerably thicker, more muscular, and there were 4 instead of 2, shaping this form into something akin to a collection of snakes and a centaur combination. Beings strolled past me, most of which unaffected by my presence in this blank, black, room-like space, illuminated sparsely by flecks of luminescence set within black stone, very much alike the subterranean cityscape that I had discovered previously. It was in that moment that I noticed the forms and faces of the centaur, snake-like beings that strolled, as well as the dreadful setting of which I found myself within. As I examined the features, the many eyes and tentacles that exuded from nearly every part of their terrible form, I also visually imbibed the scope in which we all resided. The first thought that I gripped onto was that I was in a miniature replica of that underground cityscape, located deep beneath that terrible, decrepit mansion-like house, abandoned and ambiguous. But within moments, I finally understood that this was, in fact, the same place. The place had not gotten smaller. I had somehow gotten larger, and the faculties and functions noted to be unsuitably large earlier, all now conformed to my new, albeit terrible, form and size. These were monsters, to be sure, but in that same respect, so was I. These terrible monstrosities paid me no mind, even clicking and communicating cordially, the ones of my species anyway. And why wouldn't they? For all intents and purposes, I was one of them. But that was the other thing that struck me as odd. How could I understand a dialect composed of clicks and body movements so fluidly? My mind was literally starting to spin at the implications of all that was currently queer, and I reasoned that this must be the result of a supremely fantastical and realistic dream, or even nightmare. Being in that surreal dream state of half-conscious reason and logic, I decided to explore the wonders that my subconscious mind had created for me. Outside, upon that obsidian street, I saw smaller beings being rushed by to unknown locations by those who appeared very similar to my own new form, accompanied by smaller, more familiar creatures in robes. Creatures that walked side by side with these monsters without fear, hesitation, wonder, or anything else other than an expression of the mundane. These beings being herded were perceived as bipedal livestock or slaves, escorted uncaringly towards whatever their destination was, forcibly if any attempt to stray. These slave-like creatures I instantly recognized by the shapes and forms of their beings, but when I had initially discovered them, only their obsidian stone-like skeletons remained, those globular skulls with many sockets that were now confirmed to once contain many eyes. Limbs were long and digits clawed, and their exterior was notably covered in what looked like a deep forest green fur. While I reasoned that I should inquire about what was going on and what was to be the bulbous, gangly green creature's fate, I realized that I had no knowledge on how to form such inquiries using my current shape. I understood the language, that was clear, but for some reason, I did not have the knowledge required for using my new form's linguistic capabilities to formulate such questions out loud. Without what could be considered words or question, I soon found myself surrounded by these things, ushering me off into another unknown direction as well, albeit the opposite direction as those seemingly enslaved. Before long, only a short distance away from where I began, I found myself standing outside that large, black, empty structure with monolithic steps, with shelves and tables found within, only now they were suited for my size. Those that had accompanied me had once again left me to my own devices, standing at the base of those dreadful stairs. Assuming that I was led here for a reason, I ascended those steps and entered the building-like structure. Instantly, I identified the once empty and dusty shelves were now filled with various items and artifacts. Books, tablets, objects that shimmered, and colors that I had never seen that reflected from amorphous, shifting shapes. Electrodes of fluorescent fibers exuded from small holes in nearby walls that I had not seen before and connected to several cylinders via those ports in the front, each canister lit up with a vibrance not too dissimilar from that of a candlelight coffee can placed within a child's bedroom, flickering their displays on the surrounding walls. Dream or not, I had to know more, and since this place seemed like a museum or library of sorts, no better source for intellectual inquiry could come to mind. Hours, maybe days. I really don't know how long I spent in that place, but I was there long enough to uncover a plethora of both incomprehensible and otherworldly information. Tales of greater gods, larger than any black hole, locked in a perpetual dream state, dreaming all that is into existence. This being's firstborn, colossal abominations that presided over many planets across several solar systems and galaxies. The black planet of solid obsidian, with grand towers and colosseums, either beyond the point of Pluto, or possibly Pluto itself. These grand princes of time and space created various other submissive beings to either worship them or to be enslaved for the purposes of food. Great races, such as the tendril centaurs, to which I now look like, smaller yet intelligent beings that live underground on various planets with insect-like wings that somehow are capable of carrying them through the cosmos, and despite being equipped with crab-like pincers for hands, had constructed some of the most marvelous technology. Then there were the plant-based animal creatures that I had seen earlier. These monstrosities, despite their hideous and bold appearance, were livestock, food, also with clawed hands. And finally, there was us, humans, said to be birthed from these great titans as well. These other races somehow existed within different planes than humans do. Some may be perceived by the eye, but cannot be captured in photographs. Some cannot be seen at all, something to do with molecule vibration and wavelength. This was all very fascinating, to stand upon the brink of such a discovery, but underneath it all, there was a terrible purpose and truth. These princes that had cultivated everything now sought to destroy and enslave humanity, and benevolent beings they were not. Somehow, they were imprisoned eons ago and currently slumber, awaiting for what they call a great awakening. These beings that I was now introduced to worship these old things, and as far as I could tell, wanted them to be free. It was at this time, after many tablets and tomes had been intellectually imbibed, that I came upon information regarding a very familiar object. It was the thing that I'd been seeking this whole time, the Necronomicon. Combined with my new knowledge, I finally understood the implications of this evil book, the machinations of which their deified prisoners would be let loose, held fast within a realm beyond time and space, unchained by the energies of human dreams, and only unlocked at their focal point, a place high above the altar set atop that temple of obsidian stone, the center of which I knew then to be that of the old house, once the scene of the cultist's horrific crime against his uncle. I had to be rid of it, and of more importance, make sure that they could no longer use it. As if to answer my prayer, a group of various things, beings of different races, entered the library-like structure and headed into my direction. The one closest to me, a monstrous, crab-clawed thing, held what I desired most: the book. I don't think they expected it, for if they did, they'd put up no resistance when I attacked their leader, the one holding the book, snapping him easily like a thin pencil between my two snake-like appendages. The rest took a step back, even those who seemingly could not perceive my presence, only watching the creature that I had just destroyed crumple to the floor in a smoking heap, flesh disintegrating into a misty vapor. This fog and the moment of hesitation left me with the opportunity that I had been looking for, but as I escaped that place, a familiar sound penetrated what could be considered earlobes, a low, resonant humming. I can't be sure, but one of the faces beneath those dark robes worn by the humans that accompanied the beasts seemed more than familiar. I could have sworn that that face belonged to Dr. Phillips. But there was no time for hesitation on my part. The importance of my next few actions, more impactful than 1,000 years of cumulative human experience. I turned and moved swiftly towards the exit. I passed by rows of dusty tomes still unanalyzed, large tablets with runic depictions as tall as knee walls to my monstrous form, and what looked like collections of odd cylinders on those shelves, now not as empty, all plugged into those luminescent cable-like tendrils that exuded from the wall nearby, and shortly after, the exit. I ran for my life and all that was our existence, somehow and ponderously not being followed, at least that I noticed. Once out of this dimly lit obsidian city, I climbed back up those slopes that once led me down into it, moving fast enough to keep a decent pace, but slow enough so as to not call attention to myself. The pathways without detail in the back, subterranean corridors without landmarks, were all somehow easily recalled by me. Whether this was the result of a keen mind or some unknown gained attribute of such horrendous transmogrification undergone to my physical form, I still don't know for sure. Either way, somehow I made it back to where it had all begun, back to the shaft that led upward toward that decrepit old mansion and my possible salvation through absconsion. Somehow, possibly through the faculties of my semi-phased body and molecule vibrations, I was able to pass through any solid obstruction in my way and into that cylinder of what was now filled with water, and then an opening upon the surface. The hole in the basement of that old house was now filled with water. The old hole had become a well. As I passed through that barrier of water surface tension, climbing my hulking, writhing form onto that cellar floor, I realized that all of it, the beams above, the network of old piping, somehow seemed different, almost refurbished or newer. How long have I been here? I finally wondered to myself, a query that I should have sought the answer to a while back. But it all seemed so dreamlike and surreal to me that I now pondered at somewhat more of a grand question. When did I start accepting this new reality, discounting the possibility of unconscious function and the inherent faculties of the mind? Honestly, I was still unsure if this was all a dream or not, but I felt at the core of who I am that either way, my actions here mattered. Logic and rationale aside, I continued making my escape with this book. Uncaring of any more specifics, I climbed the stairs to the first floor. My first thought was that I was in a different house than that which I had originally entered. Everything was new. Fresh wallpaper covered every wall. The hardwood floors looked recently installed, and there was even a family residing within. A middle-aged couple with a single child, a little girl seemingly obsessed with horses and clowns, accented by her yammering on and on about her rocking horse while wearing clown print pajamas, something the mother mentioned matched the little girl's bedroom decor. The man of the house, tall and thin, a pipe between his mustached lips, passed by me in a space too narrow for him to wander through without colliding with my massive form, but he did anyway, taking no horrified notice of my looming presence, only holding his nose as if something very unpleasant had graced its sensory inputs. That's when I realized that the source must have been me, solidified as he moved back and forth, indicating that where I stood is where the acrid smell was the strongest. I wandered for only moments through the residence before I heard something strange, and it was getting louder. At least, that's what I thought at first. Another moment passed, and I soon realized that the clicking and reverberant hums were getting closer. They were here. They had come for me and the book. I needed to be rid of it. Standing in what was a brand new living room, I turned in place, looking for something, anything, and that's when I noticed it, dawning myself with a horrifying realization, but not deterring my actions. It was the ornate marble fireplace, and I knew that this was indeed the same house, only of a different time, back when the residence was young. Luckily for me, There was already a crackling fire burning within. Without hesitation, I tossed that accursed book and its apocalyptic implications into the raging fire. Within an instant, screaming and winded howls escaped from between its pages, terrorized by the flames that licked at their edges, as if the creatures depicted inside were burning alive. I watched those pages begin to yellow and singe. I watched the skin patches wither and dry, reverting back to its previously aged appearance. But it did not burn. I reached forward, attempting to stir the coals, assist in its incineration, but all I managed to do was bury it within ashes. It was too late. Tentacles and appendages of rigid bone reached out and held fast to my new form, so powerfully, in fact, that I was dragged away, back towards the cellar, as if I put up no resistance at all. After that, I can't remember. I don't know what happened next or what happened to that family, but I do know that they did not, for one reason or another, retrieve that book. Beyond that, it was an endless perpetuation of dreamscapes and nightmarish realms that only an unconscious mind can create. Terrible things that I both know to be true and others untrue, but mostly that line, as a result, has become blurred. Even when I have returned to reality as most know it, encapsulated in some way within that subterranean dystopian city of obsidian, bathed in bioluminescence, I recognize it not as actuality. It was only when my discorporated eyesight focused once again upon the man known as the cultist, the patient once held at Arkham, that I began to find a stable mental footing. How had he escaped? Was this really happening, or was it another fabrication? But when he explained his purpose here and what he had done, I finally understood. My actions meant nothing, only now incorporated into a new story of genocide within that book, a component of a new plan which I had inadvertently been a part of. The awakening has occurred, and the old ones released. The end is upon us all.
So, now that you think you've heard it all, think again. This ending stops short of the true resolution found only beyond the cover of the Dreamscape book, one that all of you can own and dread over, for what you truly desire resides inside. But if you're feeling a bit led on, you certainly won't want to miss out next weekend as we take this following to a whole new level of terror. But until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.